The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/getadvice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
Most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire with a special one-off bonus episode of Gone by Lunchtime. It's just a few days now until Auckland will have its third super city mayor. The man who is vacating the office and the chains is Phil Goff, who is also bringing to an end a political career that spans 4 decades. He came in to talk about all that, and we discussed a lot. We covered everything from his early days as an activist, his thesis, you'll be pleased to know. We also then talked about his parliamentary career, which included being at the table during that incredible Fourth Labour government with David Lange and Roger Douglas in the room, then with Helen Clark, and of course his time as the opposition leader. You remember the show me the money moment, and on beyond that through to his 2 terms as Auckland's mayor. It's a pretty interesting chat. I enjoyed it. Thanks to Spin-off members. Thanks to the Public Interest Journalism Fund for supporting our local election coverage. Thanks to Ethan Dupe for producing this episode. We'll be back with a regular triumvirate chat soon. Mayor Phil Goff, welcome. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. I think this might be my very last interview as mayor.
A farewell tour.
It is, and it has been a bit like that. It's kind of nice to have the chance to do a valedictory. I know the first time I went out of Parliament, the only time I lost my electorate seat was in 1990, and you never have the chance to say goodbye, to say how you feel about things. So I've been a bit lucky. I've been able to give a valedictory in Parliament and kind of do the same thing for the mayoralty. But I've enjoyed the mayoralty. It's been a privilege to do it, but it certainly has its frustrations.
I'm just going to, before you go into that stump speech, does it feel a bit like going to your own funeral doing all these speeches?
Yeah, there's a guy I knew that decided he had terminal cancer, and he decided that bugger waiting for the funeral. He wasn't going to hear anything anybody said at his own funeral, so he'd have his funeral a couple of weeks before he died, which, when you think about it, is quite a logical thing to do. You're going to say anything about it, say it while I'm here. I can either enjoy it or reject it. But
and I guess going around doing all these interviews, you probably do a little bit of that autopilot thing that you, of course, have to do as a politician over, 4 decades? You sometimes start delivering the same lines and words in the same order? Yeah,
I found it a little bit liberating because I'm not going back to elected office at all, but there's still, the self-imposed constraints that you have after a lifetime in politics, knowing that, you say something loose and it can be misunderstood, misreported, or you can just stuff it up. I'll try not to do that.
It must be better than doing the debates, though. I mean, it's an amazing thing. It kind of feels like there have been 700 or 800 debates this time. Every time there are all these debates. It's a fascinating process.
I did 43 candidate debates with John Tamahiri, and I swear that, halfway through, if he'd dropped dead with a heart attack, I could have finished his speech for him word for word, and he could have done likewise for me. I've got to say, those campaign meetings, the debates are quite good actually in a studio like this. So you can have a free flowing debate, but the speeches in front of audiences that might be smallish, 20 or 30, or might be largest, 200 or 300. But generally with your campaign trail, the people that turn up at campaign meetings are people that have already made their mind up.
Yeah.
You very rarely have somebody that comes along, I want to hear both candidates and then make my own decision. Mostly they are people that are already decided as his supporters or my supporters, and you spend many, many nights probably not having a huge impact, but I always felt obliged to go because your responsibility as a politician is to be accountable, responsive, and to turn up when you're invited. So the only one I missed, I think, was when my sister-in-law passed away and I was at a funeral. But it was a long grind. In parliamentary politics, in your electorate, maybe you'll have 2 or 3 debates with the other candidates, but certainly not 43.
Have you been paying much attention to this one, or have you been enjoying doing something else?
I've followed it a bit, but how do I put that? I don't think going along and to those meetings is that I'm going to learn something that I didn't know. And what I am going to find is a huge sense of frustration that I'd want to interrupt and say, look, that's not correct. This is what happened. And
we've got a question at the back from the man with white hair.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to find that after next Saturday, trying to avoid commenting on what a new mayor and a new council is doing. I really don't want to be, Sam the Eagle or Oscar the Grouch on the sidelines saying, in my day, this is what we used to do. I do recall a certain councillor that speaks sometimes when I was mayor, and I thought,
what was that councillor's name?
I think I'll give her the benefit of privacy over that. But you could make an intelligent guess. Look, when you're out of it, you're out of it. And unless there's something, where I think my integrity is being attacked, I'm going to try to just let the new mayor and council get on and do the best job they can. That's, former prime ministers, former mayors, probably better to remain silent than to be trying to contribute from the sidelines.
When does it formally happen? Is it the swearing in, the point at which you stop?
Yeah.
Or is it, I guess once there's a mayor-elect, then effectively you're
effectively on Saturday afternoon, evening, there'll be a new mayor elected, and at that point, I'm not doing any public functions or making any public comments. Constitutionally, I'm still mayor till the following Friday when the special votes have been counted and the final declaration is made. And then, of course, there's another couple of weeks and there's the inauguration.
So if we go into lockdown, the fourth lockdown, then you'll be...
If constitutionally I had to do something, I would. But for all intents and purposes, the person that is elected as mayor on Saturday should be the mayor. I took over I turned up at 7 o'clock on the Monday after the Saturday election, and I assumed the role as mayor at that point.
And that was 6 years ago now, and so you've been there for a while. Just bringing it back to now, we're talking on the Tuesday ahead of the final day, votes close on Saturday at noon, and at the moment the voting is tracking roughly the same as last time. Last time there was 35.3, 35.27, I think, turnout. This time the polls are suggesting that the winner could come in with 27 or 28% potentially. And if you do the numbers on that, if the turnout's the same, then that would be less than 10% of eligible voters electing a mayor, which is, if you'll forgive me using the technical term, a bit fucked, isn't it?
It is a technical term. It's sad. Look, I think in both of my elections I got around 50% of the vote that was cast, which is much less than that if your turnout's only between 35 and 40%. But the fact of the matter is everybody has the opportunity to vote, so those that do vote get to have the say. I'm kind of sad. I'm a baby boomer, so I think a bit about my parents' generation and the fact that one of my dad's brothers never came home, and they were fighting for something which, broadly was freedom and democracy, the right to have your say and to determine your government. And it is disappointing that people don't take up that right. Now, do we just blame the individuals that don't vote, or do we say, well, do we try to find a new system that will encourage people to be more active participants? And, you'd like to do the latter, but it's not absolutely clear how you do that. One of the things that, people say, well, why is the turnout low? It's 80% or 78% for central government. And my answer would be the public are reasonably smart. They know that the critical decisions for this country are made at a central government level. The central government takes in 93% of all public revenue from, taxes or rates. And so they hold the purse strings and therefore they are important in the decisions. Now, I think that's not an entirely accurate analysis because we can make a difference at local government. We do placemake, we do set our priorities. Either you think that climate change is real and we really desperately have to act to prevent it, or you don't and you'll just let it slide and say somebody else can do that. You do need to strive for a more inclusive society or a more sustainable society. So I think local government is really important. But if you want local government to be more visibly important, two things have got to happen. One, you've got to have some devolution of funding to local government, particularly with Auckland. It's, for God's sake, it's a third of the country's population. It's 40% of the GDP of the country, yet we don't have a fundamentally different funding mechanism from a smaller district council. And then secondly, I think you've got to have more media attention. Most of what we do at a council level, there's a couple of people that might turn up at a council meeting. We're online, but we don't get the same coverage. The mayor gets a bit of coverage, but for most of the councillors, most of the local boards, they're pretty anonymous. And for people to go out and vote, they need to know who they're voting for. And if they think, there's that list of people, I really don't know them, I'd rather not vote than vote for somebody I don't know because they might turn out to be terrible. So, we have to start to think how we can reimagine local and maybe overall democratic politics, because the long-term trend across the world is that fewer and fewer people are voting. And yet, theoretically at least, no, actually in practice, we should be better informed than ever. I can pick up my phone and I can find out whatever information I have from that little computer in my pocket. Whereas once upon a time I'd have to go away. I remember writing a thesis where I got books on international interloan. It took 2 months for them to arrive. So people are capable of being better informed now, but we still don't have the level of participation that makes democracy more real and recognise the importance of having a say over our own destiny.
You touched on it as part of that diagnosis, the relatively high level of centralised revenue, power, everything in New Zealand compared to I'd say to most of the Western world probably.
Absolutely.
The UK isn't altogether different, but there isn't much devolved power in New Zealand, and there's a tension there playing out at the moment, I think, on a grand scheme. When you think of Three Waters, obviously that's had plenty of coverage. When you think about the intensification, the housing debate, and the edicts that have come from on top, even the health system, whether it's politics, all that sort of stuff. Do you think you've identified also the tension between a massive unitary council like Auckland and a much smaller one, which has a much smaller kind of powers and mandates? Do we need to recalibrate that balance, do you think? Do you think that power needs to be devolved more in New Zealand? And would you agree that the current government seems to be more focused on centralising power? Well,
I think, mea culpa, I was in central government for 32 years and probably didn't put my mind enough to the problem, except in one facet, and that was when I was Minister of Education way back in 1989-90.
Tomorrow's Schools.
Well, we did Tomorrow's Schools and we devolved more power to politics. Well, that's now been changed in a way. But I worked with a businessman with Progressive Enterprises, a guy called Brian Pico, now deceased. But he taught me about the principle of subsidiarity. You can make the decisions best when you're close to where the information is held and close to where the impact of your decisions are felt. And I thought that was a pretty good analysis. Now, here we are in the old Mount Albert Borough Council buildings. Mount Albert Borough Council was probably about 40,000, 50,000 people. it never had the resources, it never had the staffing, it never had the professional skills to take over a whole lot of wider functions. But for heaven's sake, 1.7 million Aucklanders, we do have those skills and we do have those resources, and still the government is really focused on a centralised approach. If we were in Australia, those powers have been devolved in many senses to state government. And state government, we're probably closer to being a state government than we are to being a district council. A state government gets GST devolved to it by the government. It has the ability to raise a variety of other taxes. It does a whole lot more work in infrastructure. I think that government really does have to consider if you want democracy to thrive at a local level, then give it the authority that would justify people saying it's really important for me to go out and vote. You raise three waters. I understand why government has introduced the three waters reform. I mean, in large parts of the country, the water quality is substandard and unacceptable. That's not the case in Auckland, where we've got a thing called Watercare that caters for over 1.5 million people. And yet 28% of our assets will now be under the control of somebody other than Aucklanders. We end up with, I think, 28% of the governing authority at the regional representation group. And I've spoken out not against the reform, having regulation of water quality, wastewater and fresh water, or against having amalgamation, 67 local water authorities. That's crazy, But effectively now we've lost control over that part of a critical role that we've played. So last year, we looked at, after a couple of years of drought and where we had to bring in some initial water restrictions, we said we're going to invest $250 million and we're going to produce another 100 million litres of fresh water a day. And we did it. And we did it well. And, the quality of the wastewater, we are making real progress. The central interceptor that's going to cut the wastewater overflows off the Western Isthmus here by 80%. We've made those decisions. We've put $11 billion aside for the next 10 years in water, and now we're losing control of it. Is it because we weren't managing it well? I absolutely reject that, and I don't think one size fits all across New Zealand. And housing intensification, where the National Party and the Labour Party got into bed together and said, we know what's best for you, and we made, I think, really competent submissions to the Select Committee. People around the committee table nodded their head and said, yeah, that makes sense. And yet they didn't change. So those decisions made centrally rather than locally, I don't think that is a good thing.
And that's frustrating for Auckland. The unitary plan had already been passed. That was an agonising process in itself. You talk about the central interceptors as a massive piece of infrastructure that smaller councils simply couldn't countenance because they just don't have the fundraising ability, right? So is Auckland a special case in this argument you're making, or are you suggesting that same model could be replicated around the country? Because, and this is partly a paradox, I suppose, when you see across the board the competitiveness for these local elections, 2 people per available seat across the country, when you spread it out, you kind of think, do I really want to vest that power to that kind of level of quality of elected politicians?
And I'm sure that's the way central government thinks about it. And I'm not talking about this government. I'm talking about any central government. They look at the calibre of some of the people that get elected in areas which are pretty small, and there is a belief that a whole lot of New Zealand, if we look at the housing intensification, a whole lot of New Zealand hadn't catered for the need for greater intensification and dealing with some of the things behind the housing crisis in New Zealand. But again, as you rightly pointed out, we put through the unitary plan in 2016. That enabled the development of over 900,000 new housing units. 900,000, that's enough to last you 30, 40, 50 years. So again, it was saying, we're going to throw Auckland into the same category as everybody else, even though Auckland patently isn't in the same category as everybody else. We do have the resources to have a proper planning team to work through that. We showed with the unitary plan we were prepared to grasp, the nettle on it. In water, God, some of the councils around New Zealand don't water meter. And if you don't water meter, people don't value what is a scarce commodity, which is water, and increasingly so. But we water meter, we fluoridate. So we'd taken the hard and the responsible decisions in all of these areas, but there was no recognition that Auckland was different and can manage its own affairs and should manage its own affairs if you want to bring democracy closer to the people.
Now, Phil Goff, I've made a terrible mistake. I haven't realised that podcasts aren't visual mediums, but I printed out a photograph here. Can you tell me what's going on in that? Can you paint a picture of that photograph that I've just put in front of you?
Yeah. On the left-hand side is one Helen Clark, probably in her early 20s with very long hair.
What year do you think we're in now?
We're in 1974.
1974.
And the guy in the middle used to work for Radio New Zealand, a guy called Stuart Hall, who's now in Canada. And the guy on the right, there's a couple of others who probably won't want their names to be mentioned, has hair almost as long as Helen Clark's, pretty scruffy looking, jeans, moustache. He might be me.
And what's going on there in that image? Do you know? Do you know where that's taken?
That was a protest march against the use of injunctions against the Northern Drivers' Union that we were opposed to at that point in time. And Helen would have been a junior lecturer then, as I was, at the Pol Studs department at Auckland University. So we were both active. Helen's a little older than me, but we both got motivated by a very similar set of circumstances. This was the age of the Vietnam War, which fundamentally mobilised me from my very first year at university, actually even before. I remember protesting against Keith Holyoake outside the Auckland Town Hall in 1969. It was the age of when we're, a movement against apartheid, the overthrow of the democratic government in Chile by Pinochet. There were a whole range of issues that mobilised us, but this was a local issue as this particular protest was organised around.
And that young man there, full of passion, full of energy, an activist, an
full
academic, full of hair. What would he have made of Mayor Phil Goff after 2 terms, do you think? What would he have... Some people have... I mean, I don't know if it's pejorative or not, but some people have called you a technocrat, a kind of a sentimental, or maybe pragmatist. What would that young man have made of this mayor?
I think there would have been a consistency there. That young man probably thought... we can change the world and we can do it quickly if only the right people are in the right places.
Right.
And he probably didn't understand how complex the world was, and that in a democracy, if you want to change the world, you've got to persuade other people to your vision.
He would have hated being told that, wouldn't he?
I don't know. I mean, why was I in the Labour Party and not in, one of the multiple fringe left groups that were often part of these protests? Because I had a pretty good I was born into a Labour family and I knew exactly why I had those values. But I was always pragmatic because, when you go out and you door knock, and I door knocked from a very young age, you find that the world isn't just a mirror image of yourself, that there are a whole variety of people with different views. And your power to make change depends on your power to persuade those people that what you want to change the world towards, your vision, is a vision that they also share. Now, there's a message in that too when you become mayor. When you're a cabinet minister, you persuade your cabinet colleagues that this is the policy you want to legislate. You then go to your caucus and you persuade them, and then you've got an automatic majority in the chamber to get your legislative measure passed. Council's a different beast. You don't have that statutory power. You don't have caucuses. You don't have votes strictly along party lines. You've got to go out and persuade 20 other people to share your vision of what needs to be done, and this is the best way, the best solution to a very real problem that you've got in front of you. So it's a mixture of knowing where you want to go, which is, probably developed through your values and your principles, but then finding the best practical way of getting there in a way that works, given the constraints that you have in terms of your budget and your ability to carry people with you. So it's making the best of the world as you find it, and taking the world as far as you can in the direction that you want to go. Now, yeah, that's pragmatism, But I believe that, in a whole variety of ways, I've been able to make some real progress. Climate change, the water quality targeted rate, the natural environment targeted rate. People hate rate increases, really hate them. First thing people ask you at a public meeting, are you going to increase the rates? And, I understand why they say that, because money is a scarce commodity for them. They need to be able to afford their rates. But if you want to change things, if you want to stop the harbours being polluted, if you want to protect the iconic kauri tree from being wiped out by kauri dieback, if you want to do things that will really reduce your emissions so that you can stop the worst scenario for climate change coming about, You've got to have the money to do that. And on each of those three issues that I've just named, I was able to persuade not only a majority of councillors that we should do that, but a majority of Aucklanders as well, because when we do these things, we ask for submissions. Now, we overwhelmingly were supported by the submissions, but submissions are by people who are activists. What about the mainstream community out there? So we went out and we polled and we put our argument out to the public, and we also persuaded a majority of people that something like the climate action targeted rate was something that they would support. Yes, you should do that, they said to us. And, armed with those polls, I could then go to my councillors, some of whom were very reluctant to do anything, and say, look, this is what the people want you to do, and we have to do it because we've looked at the evidence, and it's critical that we do this. So, I've from that young man in the photo, you would expect that 40 years of experience in political life have changed the way that I've gone about doing things. Has it changed my fundamental beliefs about an inclusive society, a sustainable society, the quest for peace and stability in the world? No, those are the things that still drive me. But I have become more pragmatic about how I can achieve those things. And you would expect that after 15 years as a cabinet minister and 6 years as a mayor.
You mentioned teaching at Auckland University, and a few years before that you will have completed your thesis, which you also mentioned a moment ago, and doing the interloans and so on. 488 pages, I believe, on the relationship between the Labour Party and the unions. Yeah, which is what a grounding. Yeah. What was that? What did you have an argument? I mean, did it have a powerful thesis? Yeah. Look, there's a lot of stories about that thesis. One, I was still writing it when that photo was taken. Oh, I see. Because I was teaching full time. I was working full time as chair of Young Labour, and I was meant to be writing a thesis. And it was just under 500 pages. And when I gave it to my supervisor, Professor Bob Chapman, he said, "You realise I would have given you a first if you had just done the first chapter." Bugger. a life ahead of you in long reports. Please give us the executive summary. Yeah, and the good thing about it was that my wife typed it up on the latest technology, which was a golf ball typewriter in triplicate and carbonated paper. And after that, she wasn't my wife at that point. She was my girlfriend. I thought, wow. A woman that'll do that for you, you ought to marry her. It was an interesting exercise. The hardest exercise I did in university. Papers were pretty straightforward. You studied up the topics and you answered the questions in the pressure of the exam room. But writing a thesis where you had to analyse and collect the material together, I think it was an important part of my learning. But I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat thinking, shit, I haven't finished my thesis yet. So a thesis on Labour and the trade unions. And then you went into Parliament. I think you got into Parliament the same year as Helen Clark, who's also in that. Yeah, both in 81. 81. And one in Roscoe, one in Mount Albert. Neighbouring electorates, and then you give a maiden speech, you do the necessary invocations of Michael Joseph Savage and so on. And then you find yourself very young Cabinet Minister in 84, is that right? Yeah, July 84, 31 years old. Just as well I knew everything then. I've forgotten the lot since I was 34. And that gave you a literal front row seat at an incredible episode, an extraordinary episode in New Zealand politics, right? Tell us some of the characters that were around that cabinet table. Yeah, well, it was an extraordinary government to be part of, and the thing I remember, even before we were sworn in, we were called together in our old caucus room in the old building in Parliament to get a briefing just after the election. And it was Bernie Galvin, Secretary of Treasury, Rod Dean, Governor of the Reserve Bank.
And they literally outlined to us what the state of the New Zealand economy was.
Yep.
And, look, it's become a time-honoured thing to say, we've opened the books and it's much worse than we thought. That's why we've got the Public Finance Act now, and you actually have to open the books before an election. But it was literally like that.
It was a great big fright after that snap election.
I thought we will be a one-term government.
Yeah.
This is such a mess. How the hell are we going to try to realise what you go into a campaign with your dream of what you can do when you're in government. And
you're giving all this preamble by way of we had no choice but to do what we did? Is that
no, not entirely. I mean, you always have choices.
Yeah.
And I know there is no alternative. Tina was the phrase of the day. We had a very young cabinet. I was the youngest member of it, but the cabinet as a whole, I think the average age was 37.
Yep.
David Lange was probably 40, 41, 42. Roger Douglas a bit older. And a lot of what we did at that time wasn't, was radical for New Zealand in the sense, Lange used to use the phrase, this country was being run like a Polish shipyard. And it was very evocative. I'd studied Eastern European and command economies at university and taught a bit in them. And we were like that. We had wage control, rent control, price control. We had big tariffs. We didn't open ourselves up to trade. My dad was a railway tradesman. That was the tradition I grew up in, and both of his brothers, or two out of the three of his brothers. And, we had the railway workshops that employed 20,000 people. And one of the people there was actually Leanne Dalzell's late husband. And he said, Phil, I remember going along to work, and at best we would have one day of actual work in a 40-hour week, so 8 hours out of the 40. The rest of the time we sat around. Well, you can't run an economy like that. You can't run the railways like that. So the changes that we made were kind of, many of those changes were rational, and they were the right things to do. We floated the dollar. We opened ourselves up to international trade. Nobody today in mainstream politics, or even on some of the fringe of the politics, would say that was the wrong thing to do. We floated the dollar because it was costing us a fortune, trying to sustain a dollar at a level that you couldn't sustain. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars Muldoon lost in trying to do that. So many of those changes are mainstream, but they were tough at the time. They were tough on farmers. They were tough on workers that worked in things like the car industry. I remember, I don't know if it was after your time probably, but buying my first car, and, the price that you paid for a beaten up old piece of junk was huge because, we paid for cars to be assembled in New Zealand, and it cost about a third more to assemble them in New Zealand than to import them built up. So the second biggest purchase of a working person's life was made that much more expensive. So a lot of those changes, they were hard, but they were necessary. Some of the changes went too far, and some of what then Roger Douglas wanted to do after 87 went far too far. And I found, I'd been a strong supporter of the fundamental changes that Roger was making. But he lost me, with some of the things that he in some ways it was, he's not a reactionary, he was a radical. But the sort of changes, I just couldn't see how they would work. Having a flat tax, how do you have a flat tax and still achieve equity in society? And, from being a very successful government in the first 3 years, we then had that terrible disunity between David Lange, Roger Douglas. The caucus was split down the middle. And fundamentally, if you go into an election disunited like that, how could you expect the public ever to have confidence in you? And they didn't, and we got thrown out.
Was it because Douglas was sort of doctrinaire and ideological? Is that what happened? I mean, you talked before about as mayor and having to find agreement, talk to people who aren't necessarily ideologically on the same track as you. And of course, in those days, this was pre-MMP. So there was it was cabinet rule, really, right?
As Geoffrey Palmer said, we were the fastest lawmakers in the West, and he was a constitutional lawyer. Look, I don't think Douglas started off ideological, and frankly, I don't think Labor in the 70s knew exactly where they wanted to take the country economically, which is why Roger Douglas had such an influence, because through the 70s, in the early 1970s as a cabinet minister, and he was Minister of Housing, so he treated me pretty well as Minister of Housing. I built a lot of state houses in that fourth Labor government. But he moved, and then I think people, Business Roundtable, etc., got in his ear, and he took the policy changes, I think, too far, and worked on the basis of, you're going to make change, you do it quickly, and people will finally catch up with you, but by that time you've done it. Yeah, might have been right, but it's a little inconsistent with democracy if you're just doing things by being able to ram them through. So I think, where we ended up under the next Labor government, under Helen Clark's prime ministership, was a far more centrist position and traditional position for the Labor Party to be in. We still made changes, but we approached it in a different way, and that was a government that I think was a lot more mainstream. But then we weren't dealing with the crises that the Lange government found itself in, caused by the snap election.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the pōtiki of the taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama for Ko Papa Ko Rangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Hey, you talked about the not getting to give a valedictory because you lost your seat. And was it 1990 you lost your seat? And then you had what I've heard you describe as a sabbatical.
Yeah.
So you did, and did you was that a closely run decision whether or not to go again? Is the first part of the question, and the second part of the question is, if you hadn't, what might have those next decades been filled with? Would it have been academia or something else?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, after 6 really hard years in government, and I ended up with the education portfolio and a massive reform. It was
you were the first education minister to introduce fees.
Yeah. And I tell you what, if students today had the chance to go back to the allowances and fees system that I'd introduced, they would have grasped it with both hands. Lockwood Smith said, no, we're going to reverse the fees, and if I don't do that, I'm going to resign. Well, of course, he did neither. He increased them under the Richardson-Bolger government. Look, for a start off, it was bloody good to get my life back, to tell you the truth. I mean, I'd worked every hour I had. When I went out of office, I bought a small block of land. I love living in the countryside. I love doing farm work, hard physical work. I really enjoyed the first year, and I got a job as a senior lecturer at Auckland, what's now Auckland University of Technology, Bachelor of Communication Studies, and it was good. I had my life back. I then won a scholarship to go to Oxford University, which was a great experience in 1992. And I got back to New Zealand, and Oxford partly convinced me that I didn't want to be an academic. I'd spent 6 years as a cabinet minister where I wanted to learn to apply that learning to how I could make the world, the community, society a better place. And Oxford was very much a very academic university, and I found people weren't interested in how you'd apply that. They were interested in the knowledge. And so, that was, I still wanted to make a difference.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the university is meant to be this kind of free space of open ideas, but you were gagging to talk more
I wanted
practicalities.
Yeah, and I've always said about our New Zealand universities, too often the universities haven't been as intimately involved in helping change society as they want to be. In the United States, people move between the private sector, academia and the government sector just as a normal course of events because, President will bring his cabinet in. They're not elected. They're brought in from top areas of industry, top areas of academia. And I always thought that our universities undersold themselves in terms of, what they could do to produce change. But I came back in early 93 and I found that I was yelling at the radio during morning report and my wife looked at me sadly and she said, "You're going to go back into politics, aren't you?" And I felt that I had unfinished business. So I got beaten by a guy in 1990 that I shouldn't have been beaten by. And
who was that?
A guy called Gilbert Miles. He was famous at the time. He went through about 3 political parties.
You once also beat Wayne Mapp for the candidacy for the Labour Party, going back a bit further, talking about people jumping parties.
Yeah. Wayne in those days was Labour, and I think I had 23 candidates up against me in the Mount Roskill selection, including George Hawkins and a whole lot of others. And here was I, this young guy that people thought Roskill, fairly conservative seat. We wouldn't take that risk. But anyway, so I did go back and I did win. I won my seat back and I held my seat thereafter. And we were called retreads. You'd been in Parliament, you'd lost your seat, and you were back again.
And you got a second go at it. Being a cabinet minister, had a bunch of different portfolios.
I did another nine years in cabinet, 6 years in the first government, and then 9 years in the second. I started off with foreign affairs and justice, 2 really big portfolios. Loved both of them. I think I made a real difference in both of them, and then went on and did trade and defence and a few other things as well. And I found that really satisfying. But in finding it satisfying, I love the idea of you go into a portfolio, you've got these challenges to meet. You collect together information, you get the best advice you can from your officers, you talk to your party people, you talk to experts in the field, and you apply that. All of that was good, but it made you a really bad opposition leader because I wanted to be constructive and positive and how you could solve problems, not about sitting on the sidelines, saying things that you didn't actually believe in, but that you could use to...
you feel like you were faking it a bit when you became opposition leader?
I didn't fake it, and that that might have been the problem.
Oh, you weren't faking it enough?
I did things that I believed in. I actually believed that we needed a capital gains tax, and that
didn't go well, did it?
No, but I think I was right. And bugger it all, I'd rather be right and then pay the price for, people weren't ready for that, than to say, actually, I don't believe in that when I actually do. And I don't. But then
you also exalt the idea of a pragmatic politics of doing what you need to do, and that's exactly what Jacinda Ardern did, isn't it? She did the same thing that with National Super. It's like, we're not going to deal with that one, and not on my watch.
I had different policies on both of those areas. I think that the super age should have gone up over time to 67. Here am I, fully employed at 69, because, supposedly the 60s are what used to, we used to regard as the 50s. You live longer, you contribute. My fundamental belief is I might have paid my share of tax. I probably paid every dollar I ever needed to pay in tax. But I'm not a priority for being paid national super in my mind.
But coming back to the politics of it, the Goff doctrine, the universal Goff theory of everything that you described earlier was, it's all very well having those views if you can't affect them, if you can't win. So
that's true. But what I'd probably figured out is when you've been in government for 9 years and then you go into opposition, your chances, there has never been a Labour government elected in the first election after they've been defeated for office. So I knew it was an uphill battle. I knew, if I was really pragmatic, I would have said, no, poison chalice. I don't want to be leader of the opposition. Let somebody else have a go. I didn't think that. My cabinet that I was part of unanimously said, you're the person that should run, and we're relying on you to do that, and I did it. So
you're saying you were reluctant leader?
I didn't grasp a role. I mean, it was a huge privilege actually to be leader of the Labour Party, so I like that. The role of leader of the opposition, I, apart from maybe one or two exceptions, I don't think there's anyone that's performed that role that says that it's not the worst job in Parliament.
Well, in one sense, Jacinda Ardern timed it perfectly. You just do it for seven weeks.
Yeah.
When I'm not even being tongue in cheek on this because everybody expects you to do nothing but debate and some version of attack, whereas. If you have to do it for longer, it might not suit a sensibility. Maybe it didn't suit your sensibility. In a way, I don't think it particularly suits Christopher Luxon. I can feel him sometimes it looks like he's trying to fire up in question time, and I wonder whether actually he's better suited to a ministerial or even prime ministerial role than an opposition leader.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfectly sound analysis. I think Jacinda is the timing, and she was a reluctant leader of the opposition too. I mean, she hadn't actively sought that, genuinely hadn't. 7 weeks that changed the world. What a performance she put on. Absolutely superb. I got huge respect for her communication skills and for her as a person. John Key had done pretty much the same thing. He didn't have a long time in opposition. It is a really tough job, and I think of somebody like Muldoon, very successful leader of the opposition. He beat the Labour government, the third Labour government, after one term. But what did he beat it on? Things like demolishing the New Zealand super scheme, which would have revolutionised the way that we could have invested in our own country. Worst thing that any politician ever did in New Zealand. But it was very popular at the time. He said, I'll give you all your savings back. So here was a handout, sometimes into thousands of dollars, short-term thinking, and absolutely ruthless, those dancing Cossacks. I mean, we look at that and we ridicule it today, but hugely effective at the time. But did that make him a good leader for New Zealand? No. I think it made him one of the worst leaders that this country's ever had.
That 2011 campaign where you were the leader of the Labour Party, there was that moment which, I'm sorry, but people bring it up, the show me the money moment.
Yeah. Good line from Key.
A good line from Key. How did that that was about capital gains tax, right? And it was about tax policy.
He was doing the thing that governments quite properly always do. Well, you've got all these policies, how are you going to pay for them? And that's always the vulnerability of somebody in opposition. I look back, actually, just because I'm packing up my office at the moment and stuff that I'd brought up with me from Parliament. I mean, I think that by and large I ran as maybe not as good as a campaign as I could have, but a pretty good campaign, in that I doubled my ratings in the poll at the time during the course of the campaign. But, and we focused very much on the opposition I had to privatising the hydro dams, and I stand by that. I don't think they should have been privatised. They're a licence to print money, and they're strategic assets. But, I wasn't going to beat Key after one term in opposition and one term in government for him. But he was a very smart politician. If you give him his dues. I mean, I don't think he used his political capital to advance New Zealand as he might have. But he was, in his own right, a very good communicator. I went back and watched those last debates between Helen Clark and John Key. And
you mean you did that during the campaign?
I did that during the campaign. Yeah. What could I learn from it? Yeah. And, I remember back in 2008, we knew the calibre that Helen Clark was as a Prime Minister, proven skills, ability, hard work, etc. But then you had this fresh-faced John Key coming in, much lighter. He turned what Helen Clark's strengths were, her gravitas, into a weakness. We're sick of this government that knows best for us. So he was a smart politician, but again, I'd say, but John, how did you change New Zealand for the better? The Clark government, we could look at things like the Burin, the Kiwi Saver, and a range of different programs did the right thing in terms of not getting involved in the war in Iraq. When you look back on it, you say, well, okay, it's not just about me and the fact that it's nice to be a cabinet minister, but what difference was I able to make for the country? And, why am I Labor? Because I think Labor governments always do try to make a difference for the country in a positive sense, and that's what motivates them and drives them, rather than simply the quest for power and the desire to maintain, the quote-unquote natural leaders of the country and the economy. I'm a change person. I want to see how we can change things for the better. I'm not a status quo person.
Given that mindset, when those 7 weeks happened and Jacinda Ardern, who had worked for you in your electorate office, was it?
No. When I was Minister of Finance, I gave her a first job out of Waikato University. She was a very clever young woman then.
And impossible to say these things with retrospect, but do you think, this is somebody special?
No. I thought she was
just a staffer.
No. I thought she was special. I didn't realise how special she was and the abilities that she had. And then,
but when that extraordinary few weeks happened, there must have been at least part of you that thought, damn it, I could have been part of that, whether or not even just along for the ride.
Yeah, look, the portfolios I really enjoyed, like foreign affairs and the trade portfolio, would love to have had the chance to do that again. But I've made my decision. I've said before in the course of this interview, I don't like being in opposition. I like to be able to tackle problems and find solutions to problems. And the Mayoralty was one way that I could do that. Equally tough in many ways, given the scale of the challenges that Auckland faced, but far better to be constructive and to take hard decisions and feel that you can make a difference than sit on the sidelines and simply just hold the government to account and to complain about what the government is doing. So I'd been in Parliament for 32 years. That was that's longer than most. And I thought, look, I've probably contributed as much as I can. So it was refreshing to come into the Mayoralty, and I have no regrets for making that decision. And
so over the course of all that time, you have that rare overview, right, where you can sort of see maybe today more than most days during it, how things might have changed there. And I'm interested, how has politics changed in terms, maybe tonally, maybe? I was sort of struck by some of the things that Grant Robertson said recently about how this coming election, he's not sure whether there will be able to do the shopping mall walkabouts. Did you see that? In terms of some of the stuff has grown over time. You mentioned the Cossacks and the oppositionalism back in the day, so we should be careful not to, in some ways there's no new thing under the sun. But there is, it seems to me, a slightly changed level of toxicity, a slightly changed level of venom, and this goes this is towards politicians of all stripes. This is not exclusive.
No, I think that's right. Look, over the course of my career, I've had a number of death threats. I had one this week, actually. A guy came in, he's obviously mentally ill.
In person?
Into the council office and saying that he wanted to kill the mayor and the councillors, and, so we did the usual thing and passed it on to the police. And, you feel sorry for the guy. He was obviously mentally ill. But it is, I think the bitterness and the vitriol has increased. And I put that down to a couple of things. I think social media, very rarely do I find in person, and I get around to crowds all the time, very rarely do I get abused in person, almost never. But if I look on my Facebook site and I see some of the things that people are saying, and I think, God, you armchair warrior, how courageous to say these things from the anonymity of a Facebook posting. But social media has meant that people are emboldened to do and say things that you wouldn't normally face to face to another human being. And, before we did this interview, we touched on, what was happening with people used to rely on the same media source, but at 6 o'clock you'd watch TV1 and that's where the news came from. And, when they had a monopoly, it was overwhelmingly the key source of information. Now people can go to different aspects of social media. They are reinforced by the messages that they have that appeal to their own prejudices. In the United States, if you're right-wing, you won't watch CNN, you'll watch Fox, and that'll reinforce your prejudice. And in a funny way, not a funny way, and a sad way really, you divide the community. It becomes much more them and us. And I grew up in a totally different world. As a baby boomer, my dad, who's a railway worker, came back from the war. They'd been a pilot with the RNZAF. And the people that I grew up with that were his friends came from a whole cross-section of society, every walk of life, because they were all on the same flight wing that he was on. And they came back to New Zealand. They said, look, we are all equal as New Zealanders. We'd all been out there. We'd put ourselves at risk. We'd seen others sacrificed for New Zealand, and we want to come back and we want to make life better for everybody. We're one country, and we've lost a lot of that. We've become in some ways far more selfish and self-centred. We're inclined to say, and I don't doubt the lockdown was hard for a hell of a lot of people actually, and probably had a psychological impact. People lost their jobs. People, for the first time in their lives, were confined to their homes. It was like being on home detention. But if we thought back, 2 generations to my parents' generation, what they went through, the Great Depression, the war, my grandmother, God bless her, she lost her brother in the First World War. She lost a youngest son in the Second World War. Her husband was imprisoned and as a prisoner of war in the First World War, died in the middle of the Great Depression. And I think of, looking at it from my own perspective, what have I got to grizzle about? I've grown up in this land of opportunity, easier for some than for others. I didn't grow up in a wealthy household. I grew up in a society that gave me opportunity. And that's what we've really got to get back to, how we want to change New Zealand. We want to change it to give every kid the same chance to make the most of their lives and to be able to contribute what they're capable of contributing. And I think our society has become narrower than that, where people, that are earning big money, people that think that it's okay. I mean, I deserve, $3, $4, $5 million in salary a year. Really? Do you really deserve that? Whoa, you must be an Einstein to deserve that. And we don't. And why was it so important to give a living wage to counsellors? Because we wanted to lift the people at the bottom up. And we've been pretty careful about lifting the salaries at the top. In fact, the chief executive now is being paid less than the chief executive was 6 years ago. He's still applying himself, giving the best of himself, and doesn't resent that. But it is creating, to go back to an earlier, our society, we want our society to be a society of opportunity and inclusion, not one of division and selfishly looking after your own interests at the expense of somebody else. That doesn't mean to say that you exempt people from individual responsibility. There is an element of individual responsibility. But if you're a kid that grows up as a fetal alcohol kid, your life is screwed right from the start because of the nature of the way that your mum lived and probably the environment that she came from. And, I'd like to see a whole lot more unity in our society as we jointly tackle real problems that don't have a Labour solution or a national solution, but they have a pragmatic solution that we need to come around together on. That sounds incredibly idealistic, but I think it's true.
Well, I think this I'm looking at the photo again now. I'm thinking that guy's his ears are pricking up.
Yeah,
he's impressed. You sound like you're just getting cracking. It's not time to retire, Phil Goff.
Yeah. Well, I'm probably not going to retire, but I'm going to retire from.
What do you think? What do you think you might do? I'm wondering if you've got a favourite restaurant in London.
Look, I think it's time for me to get out of public life. I'm, as I've said several times in this interview, I'm a baby boomer. I've got an office of people of a totally different generation, and they've been really helpful to me in making sure I'm still relevant to the 21st century. But I think it's time for somebody younger to take over that. But I still have, I hope, some skills and some experience that I can contribute back to the country.
And you were just inveighing against the vulgarity of people who earn too much money. So would you like to take an opportunity to denounce Liz Truss and her recent...
Diplomatically, how would I put it?
Diplomatically.
I would say that I was absolutely astounded by the decision that the government then took and has since reversed. It was never going to fly. It was never right. The Conservative Party recognised that for itself. But, you just wonder how you arrived at a position like that. I mean, basic economics tells you that you don't borrow to pay for tax cuts for people who are already very highly paid, and you don't do it in a way that damages the value of the pound and forces interest rates higher than they would otherwise have gone.
Very quickly before I let you go, 14 campaigns, is that right? Did I read that somewhere? 14 election campaigns. Do you have a favourite and a least favourite? Is there do you rank them from 1 to 14?
Yeah, the mayoralty was an election in my own right rather than as a member or a leader of a party. So, to have got overwhelming majorities both times for the mayoralty, that gave me a mandate, and thank you, Aucklanders, for the privilege that bestowed on me. The most exciting one, I think, though, would have been 1984, the Schnapps election. And I remember gathering with a group of other MPs in Lange's office on that night in Parliament, and we knew we were going to win. And likewise in, in 1999, and it's the excitement of going from, you've worked in opposition, you've tried to build up your alternative policies, you've been in opposition for a while, not so long for me in terms of 1984, I'd only been 2.5 years in opposition, but more so in 1999, and the anticipation that finally you're going to be able to do something to put your plans, your values, your dreams into effect. That's always a hell of an exciting time.
And the least favourite, I'm going to guess it's probably a toss-up between 1990 and 2011.
Yeah, both were really tough elections. 1990, when you go out in the streets in your electorate, when people don't look in your eye, that you're probably not going to win your electorate. And in 2011, I don't think that was an election that we were ever going to win, but you feel a hell of a lot of responsibility on you when you're leader of your party and you can't lead your party to a victory, which is why, the day after that I said I was stepping down as leader of the opposition, give somebody else a crack at it.
Last thing, there's been quite a few books coming out lately, political books.
Yeah.
Maybe your thesis isn't finished. Maybe there's a 488-page tome. Phil Goff, do you think? Seriously, do you think this is something you might do?
There's a whole lot of things, and I just think of some of the anecdotes and the experiences that I had, particularly as foreign minister. I think of the tsunami up in Indonesia and Thailand, where I was up on the ground and in a temple that had been turned into a mosque for 3,000 bodies that had been lying in the sun, and awful things. I think of Timor-Leste, where I was an observer, an international observer for their referendum about independence, and left as the militias were starting to ransack the place, and then went back as foreign minister several weeks later. There are a lot of things that I'd like to talk about, the role that New Zealand has played in the world, and one that I think we can be really proud of, Timor-Leste being one of those, but the role that we've played as a good international citizen. I'd love to sometime have the time to focus on that. I'm not going to be, I wouldn't do nobody would read a 400 or 500 page, nobody probably ever read my thesis. But doing something where you can talk about some of the issues, from a bird's eye view that you have as foreign minister, that would appeal to me to do sometime. The question is, I'd need to be retired from an active career in order to start doing that. And whether I'll have the energy and the discipline to do it, time will tell. But it would be good to write some of those things up that may be of interest to people.
You can get onto that after you have typed up whatever manuscripts your wife would like done for you by way of payback. I think.
Yeah. Well, she keeps saying these could be the best years of your life. You could be in retirement. We could be travelling widely. We could be enjoying life. We could be spending time with our grandkids. You could be out fishing or hunting or drinking red wine. Why the hell do you want to keep working? And then she knows the answer to that. She says, you need a challenge that makes you easier to live with. Unfortunately, she said that to the media, which I'm forever grateful for, but she wasn't wrong.
Well, thank you to you, Phil Goff, for coming in and sharing all those experiences. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Toby. It's been a real pleasure.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.